Right, okay, thank you. Very nice to see all of you. As Austis mentioned, my name is Karoline Lumholdt Mathisen. I'm a senior legal officer at the EFTA Secretariat. I have the pleasure of speaking with Hendrik today.
Yes, my name is Hendrik Jonsson and I'm a legal officer at the EFTA Secretariat.
And we're here to talk to you about how to read EEA law. Now, you've heard already many speakers today talk about the nature of the EEA agreement. You've heard mentions of the incorporation procedure, of the two-pillar structure, of all the annexes and protocols to the agreement, joint committee decisions, and more. So you probably understood by now that the agreement is a complex agreement. It has many layers. It has many different instruments that you need to navigate in order to read it. So what we hope to do today is to shed some light on how to read EEA law. And to start with, I think it bears mentioning again what other speakers have also said earlier today. This is that the EEA agreement creates the homogeneous European Economic Area, which is based on common rules and equal conditions of competition. And it's a dynamic agreement, so it's continuously updated to incorporate EU legal acts that fall within the scope of the agreement. And this all ensures that we have common rules across the EEA.
Yes, but the fact that the rules are the same does not mean that the legislation is exactly the same, because EU legal acts, they are written for the context of EU law, and when we incorporate them into the agreement, we need to make some adjustments so that they make sense within the context of the EEA agreement. And this might be things we do to address this different scopes of the agreement in EU law, or the institutional setup of the agreement, or a specific situation that applies in a single EFTA state. And when we make these adjustments, they're referred to as adaptations. And you can only read an EU legal act that's been incorporated in the agreement if you know which adaptations also apply to it. And we have three different types of adaptations, and Karoline's going to start off with the first one.
Yes, so the first one we're going to talk about is what we call the horizontal adaptations. Now, these are extremely important in practice. They are found in Protocol 1 to the EEA agreement, and what's important with them is that they are applicable to all acts that are incorporated into all of the 22 annexes to the EEA agreement. And what the horizontal adaptations do is that they ensure that certain recurring or general matters are resolved without having to be addressed specifically for each individual act. So as an example, Protocol 1 has a provision about where an EU legal act mentions EU nationals, for instance, give certain rights and obligations to EU nationals. Protocol 1 to the EEA agreement provides that those rights also apply to nationals of the EEA EFTA states.
Then we move on to the second type of adaptation, and that is sectoral adaptations. These are adaptations which are found in an individual annex or a protocol to the agreement or a chapter of an annex, and they will apply to all the acts within that annex. And they are used to address certain challenges which arise frequently within a specific sector of legislation rather than across the board for the entire EEA agreement. And as an example here in the field of competition, where for acts placed into that relevant annex, where there's a reference to the Commission, there's a sectoral adaptation which will have that word read the competent surveillance authority.
And that brings us to the third category of adaptations. This is what we refer to as specific adaptations. The specific adaptations are found in the decisions of the Joint Committee. They specify how an individual act shall be read for the purposes of the EEA agreement. They can either set out general rules as to how the EU Act as a whole shall be read, or they can foresee adjustments to specific provisions of the Act. An example given here is concerning labels on food products, where these conditions for setting out these labels are laid out in EU law, and there's an adaptation in the Joint Committee decision incorporating that particular legal act into the agreement that sets out that you may use the word EFTA also on those labels. And to sum up these three categories of adaptations, I think it's important to underline that even though we separate them into the categories, the legal effect of the adaptations is always the same. So it adjusts the legal act for the purposes of the EEA agreement, and they can all apply at the same time. There can be a relevant horizontal adaptation applicable, sectoral adaptation and a specific adaptation, or one or the other can apply to the given act in question.
But then if you're taking on the exercise of reading an EU act that's been incorporated into the agreement, there are then certain steps you need to take when you see that individual act. First, you're going to need to verify that the act is actually incorporated and in force in the agreement. And on the website of the EFTA Secretariat, we have a database called EEA Lex where you can actually verify this. You can look up the act there and see what the status of it is. And if it says that it's incorporated and in force in the agreement, the next step would then be to check whether or to what extent the horizontal adaptations of Protocol 1 apply to the act. Then moving on to seeing the annex or the chapter of the annex or the protocol where it's incorporated and see to what extent the sectoral adaptations there will apply. And then finally looking at the specific adaptations, which are found then either in the decision of the Joint Committee that incorporated it or will be listed as alongside the Act as well in the relevant annex, and see to what extent they apply. So 4 steps, and maybe a level of complexity there, but to help visualize it, we've at the EFTA Secretariat come up with an online tool to help you understand it in a more visual way, and I'm going to steal the mouse over here and take you there. So we call it the Adaptations Tool. And right here on our website, we have it as an example of excerpts of EU legislation which have been incorporated into the agreement. We've given up 3 examples. And when you go onto the tool and you click the relevant example you want to read, you can scroll through it and see an excerpt of the legislation as it appears in EU law or how it's been published there. Then you can click on the different buttons. So for example, horizontal adaptations. You can see the effect that the horizontal adaptation has on it. So here you have the word member state. When we have a horizontal adaptation, that will have the effect that we will understand that term as referring to the contracting parties to the agreement. And then by hovering over the adaptation in question, you'll see the legal basis for that horizontal adaptation. So that'll tell you that paragraph 7 of Protocol 1 to the agreement yields that effect. Then you can do the same by clicking sectoral adaptations and specific adaptations, and you'll see the effects that it has. For example, here in Article 9, it's point D that does not apply. We applied a strike-through effect on it, and hovering over, it'll tell you it's adaptation B, point 1 of Annex 7 to the agreement, and which Joint Committee decision it was. And that's meant to give you a visual illustration of just how reading EEA law goes and how it is different than just reading the EU Act as such in the official journal. But beyond that, we also have something more to help you out.
Do indeed. So this tool is on our website. We've also provided some more text and information about adaptations, helping you hopefully to navigate all these different levels. But to sum it all up, we also produced a little video that we'd like to show you. Hopefully you will enjoy it.
The European Economic Area, the EEA, brings together the European Union and Iceland, Liechtenstein and Norway in the internal market. The EEA agreement is dynamic, meaning it is continuously updated to make new EU legal acts part of the agreement. This ensures common rules across the EEA. While the rules are common, the EEA agreement also adjusts the legal acts. These adjustments are called adaptations. Adaptations mean that the Act shall be read or understood in a specific way for the purpose of the EEA agreement. This may reflect the scope and the structure of the EEA agreement or the specific situation of an EEA EFTA state. The EEA agreement has 3 types of adaptations: horizontal, sectoral, and specific adaptations. Horizontal adaptations are found in Protocol 1. They address certain general matters. For example, whenever the acts refer to EU nationals, this also covers nationals of the EEA EFTA states. Sectoral adaptations address, for example, common terms within sectors of legislation, like here, where the term Commission shall read Competent Surveillance Authority. Finally, specific adaptations are sometimes made to individual EU acts. For example, here, an adaptation provides that the word EFTA can be used on food labels. In summary, to read EU legal acts incorporated into the EEA agreement, you need to verify if the EU Act is incorporated into the EEA agreement. For that, you can use EEA Lex. Check the horizontal adaptations in Protocol 1 and then see if there are any sectoral adaptations of relevance in the Annex or specific adaptations to this Act. If you're interested in knowing more about how to read EU Acts in the EEA, please visit our website.
And with that, I think we just thank you for your attention. Yes.
Encore.
So thank you. We're actually now going to open up for questions, and you can either, if you have any questions on how to read EACts, or if you have questions on ESA, the floor is yours. We're also getting questions through the chat, but first, is there anyone here? Yes. So I'm just going to walk to the mic, and please, if you would hold it really close to your chin.
On Euro-Acts, you can find consolidated versions of EU Acts. I just wonder if you can do the same EEA Acts with this tool.
Cannot, unfortunately, find consolidated text. So the tool is used to illustrate examples, but the approach is the same for any act you would need to look up. So by using the approach that's set out in the tool, you can consolidate the text of the incorporated legal act.
When you have specific adaptations, are there adaptations which are valid only for one country, like only for Iceland or only for Norway? Or they are specific in terms of subject, but horizontal in terms of applicability?
I would say both. We have examples of both types. Certain adaptations will only concern one of the EFTA states. We can take Liechtenstein as an example. Liechtenstein having close relationship with Switzerland, there's sometimes specific rules setting out specific provisions for Liechtenstein. Other times they apply across the board. For instance, where ESA is given tasks vis-à-vis an EU agency, that will apply horizontally.
Any other questions here in the audience? I have one question just while we wait. Could you say a little bit more about because there was no sort of joint committee for the Commission and ESA. Is there any sort of consulting that happens between, and is that in some kind of formal way, even though there's no joint committee?
Yeah, that's a very good question, and yes, the contacts are direct. Basically, the person in ESA who is in charge of transport and is dealing with aviation will be in contact with their colleagues in the European Commission who do the same kind of airport checks. And it is a question that arises, they know to pick up the phone and say, we've been confronted with this situation in that state. Have you had the same in one of the member states? How did you approach it? So there is a rule in the EEA agreement that ESA and the Commission would exchange information not only on the strategy but also on individual cases. And it is, let's say that the uniform application of the EEA rules very much depend on this direct contacts and the trust between the institutions and the capacity to build this common understanding and apply it in the same way across the board.